Welcome to Turtle Talk. Dive into the fascinating world of timeless trend-following strategies and the pursuit of the elusive outliers made legendary by the turtle traders. Join your hosts, Adam and Rich, alongside our esteemed co-host, Jerry Parker, as we uncover the powerful principles of classic trend following. From counterintuitive practices to the mechanics behind capturing market outliers, each episode offers a masterclass in navigating the financial markets. Expect in-depth discussions, expert insights, and actionable advice to help you master the art and science of diversified, systematic trend following, turtle style. Tune in every month as we explore the dynamic and ever-evolving world of trend following, equipping traders and enthusiasts with the tools to succeed. And now, without further ado, let's hand it over to your hosts, Adam, Rich, and Jerry.
Welcome, everybody, to Turtle Talk. Now, this one is going to be a different format. Our usual episodes are a conversation among trend followers about markets and method, but this is a special and it breaks our normal format on purpose. We have brought two worlds into one room, trend followers on one side and on the other, two Marines from different ends of the globe who have spent their careers studying how you act under fire when nothing is certain. Here is how this all came about. A little while back, Jerry, Mike, and I were lucky enough to be invited on the No Way Out podcast with Mark McGrath and Brian Rivera. We went into that podcast expecting to explain our world to theirs, but what we found instead was that we were almost speaking the same language. So the way the militarists think about acting under uncertainty and the way we trend followers think about following a trend, it kept landing in the same place. We were three trend followers and a room full of military strategists, and the philosophies were nearly identical. So we felt we had to repay the favour and keep the conversation going. So we have invited Mark back and Ben Ford alongside him onto Turtle Talk, so we can carry the conversation on from the trend followers side of the table. We're going to put those two worlds side by side and see what we can learn from each other. And because we're going to take a deep dive for each segment, this special will run across two episodes. So without further ado, let's get into it. So here is why these two worlds belong together. On the surface, they may seem to have nothing in common, but underneath, they share the same problem. It is the oldest one there is. You cannot see the future. Your plan will not survive contact with reality. And yet to perform your roles, you still have to act. So the old military strategists worked on that exact problem for 2,000 years before the first markets ever opened. And we're going to walk through 8 of their ideas over 2 episodes. At each one, we're going to ask a simple question. Does the answer on both sides of the floor for modern warfare and for trend followers alike, or does the ground change when you cross from one world to the other? So here is the one idea that I want you to hold all the way through this conversation over 2 episodes. It's the thing that makes the two worlds different, and everything else hangs off it. So in war, the Marine has to predict. He has to guess where the enemy will be because nothing out there tells him. He has no scoreboard. The trend follower, however, is in a luckier position. He never has to guess where the market is going because the price already gives him the answer. The price is the whole crowd's combined opinion in one number, updated live. So the trader does not predict, he just follows that number. So that one difference, prediction on one side and simply following on the other, runs through everything we're about to discuss. So keep it in your mind as we continually come back to this frame of opinion throughout this entire episode. So let me introduce the room. With me is my co-host, as always, Adam Havryliv. Adam runs a fund I work for, and he has deep experience in behavioural psychology, the study of why we make the decisions we do. So whenever the topics we discuss start venturing into the mind, we're going to be drawing on Adam to lead that topic. And now, of course, to Jerry Parker, the legend himself, one of the original turtles, and to my mind, the lord of classic trend following. 4 decades of doing this for real with world-class returns to show for it, and the calmest voice you will find on the subject. We also have Mike Melissinos. He's going to be joining us a bit later. He's having troubles with the traffic in New York. It's a bit crazy at the moment. But if Jerry is the classic, Mike is the punk rocker of trend following. He's a baseball nut, a bold trader who runs higher volatility, and like Jerry and Adam, a fund manager who knows exactly what this feels like today, not just in theory. But on the war side, we have 2 Marines. Moose McGrath, a US Marine who is now with AGLX and the No Way Out podcast, and one of the deepest readers of John Boyd I've ever come across. Boyd is a strategist whose ideas tie this whole special together, and there's nobody better to carry him than Moose. And we have Ben Ford, a UK Marine who became a software builder. So Ben spent time at the Systematic Funds AHL and a subsidiary of Aspect, so he knows our world too. And he has taken these military ideas and built them into something that actually runs as working code. So welcome to all of you. So great to have you all here today, from the US of A to Old Blighty, the UK, to the penal colony in Australia. So, gents, let's not discuss the World Cup soccer and get into something far more important, warfare and the markets. So, righto, lads, here we go. So, let's start with setting up a process to understand war and setting up a process to understand the markets. Every plan we make for war and the markets, this is where it falls apart when it comes to reality. And we call this term friction. So I'm going to provide a short context on the topic before we deep dive into the questions. So every plan that we labour over is meant to be perfect. The soldier draws it up in the briefing room, where the orders are given to the men. The trend follower builds it in the back test, where the system shows beautiful returns on past data. Both plans look flawless. Then both meet the real world. So we're going to start with what happens at that meeting point. The military calls it friction. It's the small stuff that goes wrong the moment you act, the delay, the mix-up, the thing that does not behave the way the plan assumed. Now, Boyd wrote about it 50 years ago, and it is still the first thing that breaks any plan. So I'm going to start with you, Jerry. Tell us about a fill that went against you, a real one, where the price you got was nowhere near the price the system expected.
Well, it was a big day in 1992, and had only been trading for a few years. And it was the day of the British election, and the Tories and John Major unexpectedly won. And I had to go into the office at 3:00 in the morning and liquidate my positions in the gilt, the short sterling, the FTSE, and the British pound. And so I drove in, got out of those positions, and I think I lost 7% that day. And there was these massive gaps up. And I was driving back home in the dark, and I was pulling into my driveway, and I just had a little talk with myself, what kind of person I was going to be and how I was going to react to this. And, I think I ended up making money that month. I'm not sure, but that's what I kind of remember. So a very shocking situation where I just had to go in and put one foot in front of the other and get the job done and get back in bed.
Yeah, that's a painful mistake. So over to you, Moose and Ben. So Jerry described how friction looks to us trend followers. What does it look like on your side in the first 5 minutes after a plan meets the enemy?
Yeah, I guess I'll take a crack at that first. As defined by the seminal text that outlined the Marine Corps warfighting philosophy, and the title of the book is called Warfighting, and everybody can access it for free online via PDF. You could just as easily call it trend following, with I guess Michael Covell's already written that book, but you could have a book called Trend Following Trading, and the concepts would still hold. We could start with friction, as you mentioned. That's the force that's going to resist all action, that basically makes everything that would seemingly be simple all of a sudden feel impossible, as if something was working against us. Something maybe would seem so easy all of a sudden becomes so difficult. And the essence of war, not unlike the essence of capital markets, where you have opposing forces, whether it's the trader versus the market, whether it's fund A versus fund B, that the very essence of that type of conflict is always going to have friction. The enemy or the market is going to seek to resist and impose its will or its force upon us, and it's up to us to overcome that within our environment.
Ben, anything to add?
Yeah, so I would just say, part of military planning and military doctrine is, it kind of echoes what Jerry said, actually. You know that things are going to go wrong, and part of the planning process is thinking through the most likely things that might go wrong. So you have a part in the orders process which is actions on. So you have your perfect plan, you build your little map, your map box in the sand pit, and you've planned how your assault's going to go in. And then the last bit is, and then what? If the shit hits the fan in this way, what are we going to do? If the shit hits the fan in the other way, what are we going to do? And I was reminded of that when Jerry said, stuff doesn't always go as you expect, but you have a bunch of known possibilities where it might go wrong, and you normally would have some kind of immediate actions, so that instead of having to stop and say, "Oh, we didn't think about this," we need to now, go through a whole replanning process. You have some instant kind of SOPs that are, bang, bang, bang. You have to go and do this, this, and this if this happens. So I think that's one of the things that seems to span both worlds of, you consider the things that might go wrong and you make plans for those as well, and then you have them ready to execute.
Yeah. So for us trend followers, friction is mainly the gap between the backtest and the real fill. It's the reason we build robust systems rather than perfect ones.
Can I clarify one thing about the warfighting angle? Is to remember that since warfighting, not unlike training, it's a human enterprise. It's a human venture. And it's the cognitive or the mental or the moral friction that we could have too. Friction doesn't just necessarily have to be physical force or a deadline to get a trade in, or too much capital, lack of capital, something physical. It can be external and imposed by market forces, but it could also be mental and internal. And in order to fight effectively or to trade effectively, it's up to us to operate within that medium, knowing that friction is always going to be a constant, and it's up to us to reduce and overcome that as we move forward and advance our trade plan or advance our plan to get ashore and defeat an enemy.
Yeah, to that point, Mark. I mean, we talk about the mental game of trading, and trading is high stakes. Obviously, not as high stakes as war or conflict, where your life is potentially on the line. But it still is a high stakes game because we're dealing with money. And I can just talk to a recent trade that on paper looked so simple and felt so good, and that was the breakout in energy. Long energy positions that we had earlier in the year, and it just seemed like the perfect setup. We had great breakouts. We're getting in on pretty low volatility, so the positions are nicely sized, and everything is aligning. The back test, the breakout, the news, the closure of the straits, and potentially a huge money making trade. And you look at where oil is today. I think it closed at $70. But basically confounding everybody. Well, myself anyway. I can only really speak for myself, but as a trader, I would have to say, this move up and then the move down, whilst the warring parties are still, throwing barbs at each other, physical, and diplomatic, and tweets and the whole thing going backwards and forwards. Just having to realign the mind to say, this trade is not working. Going back to the plan, and then exiting or reducing those positions on the way down, even though you're looking at the screen and the news and going, how can this be possible? So that's my most recent experience, I think, of friction that I've mental friction that I've observed.
So friction in war comes from many directions. So some of it is just the world getting in the way, the mud that stops the supplies, the weather, the broken equipment. Some of it's the enemy, a thinking opponent deliberately trying to gum up your plan. A trend follower's friction, however, is a bit different. It's impersonal. The market is not trying to beat us. It simply does not care that we exist. It's not an opponent. It's more of an indifferent force. So I'm going to throw a question to the room. The friction that comes from an enemy, you can study and outthink, because at least there's a mind on the other side to outthink. Or the friction from something that has no intent at all, like the markets, that you can never outwit, only prepare for. So I'm going to start with the military side. So Moose and Ben, your thoughts, gentlemen.
Yeah, I mean, friction's a constant. It's just how I deal with it. And what might be friction to traders might not be friction to Marines, and vice versa. It's going to start in the mind and how we look at it morally, how we look at it mentally. What we have to, I know we're going to get into it at some point, but what we have to be able to do is to sort of shatter and disconnect our correspondence of reality of what we think is actually going on to what align that, the word was brought up earlier, gap, account for that mismatch, and to reorient ourselves to the reality. And that's another way to overcome mismatches that we either expect or we don't expect. That causes friction, and we have to have the ability to change how we look at that faster than the rate of change, than an opponent or whatever. And we have to do so effectively that's aligned with reality, because it's not merely about speed, it's about direction.
Yeah, I would say in some ways the individual combat or war is the easier one, because it's all up to your own skill and your own preparation, right? Special forces can have much higher training and much higher success rates because of that skill, that differential. But on the other hand, it's an all or nothing thing, right? In combat, even if it's simulated combat, simulated, but you're dead. Whereas with the impersonal nature of the market, if you set your systems up, Boyd has this saying, it's a biological imperative to improve your capacity for free and independent action. Well, if you're dead, your capacity for free and independent action goes to zero immediately. Whereas if you're in the markets, you do have that optionality to set your systems up such that you never go to zero by having the right support structures. So I would say, potentially easier to win in a combat situation because you control your own skill and you can confuse and outwit, and you can't do that in the markets. But in the markets, you can set things up so that you never approach the extinction event and you get to go again. And therefore, I'd say, I guess it's evens.
Jerry and Adam, anything to talk about in relation to the indifference of the market and how friction deals with that? Anything you want to add there?
I guess it's coming back to a plan. As you say, Rich, I don't think the market really cares about your position. Obviously, there are traders trading against each other, effectively attempting to profit, by being long when another person's short, or short when another person is long. So, reverting to that example I've given, it's, notwithstanding what you're seeing on that on the screen and how you think this trade should work out, it's reverting back to the plan and effectively exiting gracefully and protecting capital, even if a trade is not working out the way that you thought it would be.
So I'll summarise this topic. So where we both agree, the plan never survives first contact with reality. So you need to build for the mess, not for the tidy version on the whiteboard. Have these contingencies in place that Ben was talking about, all of these things. Realise that things are going to go wrong from that perfect plan that you first laid down. But where the trend followers and militarists might slightly differ in opinion, so much of the friction from the war side is an enemy choosing to resist you, a mind you can work against. But for us trend followers, it's a market that doesn't even know we are there. So this therefore takes us to the thing that makes all of this so hard in the first place. So you can never see the whole picture, and this is where I want to go to in the next segment, which is called the fog. There is an old verse that I want to you all to sit with, because it's the heart of this whole next section. So here it goes. It's called "For Want of a Nail." So I'll just read out this verse.
It's a classic.
For want of a nail, it's a classic.
Oh,
for want of a nail. Yeah, you know this one?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so here we go. For want of a nail, the shoe was lost. For want of a shoe, the horse was lost. For want of a horse, the rider was lost. For want of a rider, the message was lost. For want of a message, the battle was lost. For want of a battle, the kingdom was lost. And all for the want of a horseshoe nail. So that, dear listeners, is the fog. And notice what the verse is really showing us. The problem was never a lack of information. Everyone could see the nail was missing. The trouble is that no one standing at the blacksmith's could have traced the line from that one missing nail all the way to a fallen kingdom. So each step only made sense looking backward. So the lost shoe explains the lame horse. The lame horse explains the unhorsed rider. The rider explains the undelivered message, and it just goes on, but only after the fact. So looking forward from where you actually stand, the chain is invisible. That is the fog. It's not darkness. It's not missing facts, but it's a future that refuses to assemble into a picture no matter how long or how hard you stare at it. So a Marine probably understands this fog better than most, because a Marine fights with the sea at his back. The sea is the medium that never holds still and is never the same twice. He has to read something fluid and indifferent and act inside it. So I'm going to start with you, Moose.
Yeah.
Take us into the Marine's fog first.
So really another way to say it's just that's a characteristic of uncertainty, of a constant atmosphere of uncertainty. It also, too, in the parable that you gave of the want of a nail, what that's talking about is the interconnectedness and complexities which people may or may not be aware of. I may or may not have awareness of things that are interconnected, be it through networks, be it through just chance or happenstance. I may not be aware of how things are connected, and I may not be able to account for those things, certainly in an environment that is uncertainty. That's one of the, I know we're going to get to John Boyd at some point, but that's one of his real values. And this is where reading Warfighting and other texts that I could recommend books that Marines would read that trend following traders should absolutely read, and vice versa. Trend following books that Marines should read, because the environment of uncertainty and the atmosphere of uncertainty and the fog, it's extremely similar, and there is that constant that complexity and interconnectedness. Whether it's the want of a nail or if it's the butterfly effect or anything, it's going to set a chain of things that I may or may not have account for that go on with or without my knowledge or with or without my understanding. Those are the sorts of things why I have to be in a constant state of reorientation, because of that uncertain nature of war, just like trading.
So Ben, you sit between both worlds. military and trend. So here's what I want you to explain. How can a whole crowd of people line up on something and agree on something without ever talking to each other? What is the shared thing that makes that happen?
One of the ways I like to try and reframe what Boyd was talking about, and it kind of, I think there's a way to kind of unify the fog and the friction. The flavour of Marine that I come from is the Royal Marines Commandos. The behind the lines. We got our start in the Second World War, and our whole job was to cause wants of nails, right? To go and cause friction, to create fog. And one of the ways that I try and like to reframe Boyd is, think about what understanding a world is. You take an action, it's like casting a pebble into the future. And the only way you can discern what the result of that action was is to see the ripples. But everyone's throwing pebbles at various different, lengths and speeds. And so the only thing we can ever discern, and I guess Adam would have some thoughts on this as a behavioral psychologist, the only thing that we can ever discern is that overlapping diffraction pattern of all these different actions coming into us. And a whole crowd can agree without having the message, because we're all sitting on that pond that's getting the ripples, and we all are making our own inferences about what those ripples mean. And when there's a common understanding, it just means that we interpret the ripples the same way.
Okay, so I'm going to give you a picture that makes this concrete. So think about a hurricane. The only way to know exactly where it's going to be in 6 weeks is to wait 6 weeks and watch it arrive. There's no shortcut. There's no formula that lets you skip ahead and read off the answer. You've got to let it play out. So the future here is not hidden from us as if someone knows it and is keeping it a secret. It's simply not reachable yet. It's not yet happened. And that puts the Marine and the trend follower on exactly the same ground. Neither of us can fast forward the world to see how it turns out. But here's the twist that makes markets probably stranger than war. The market changes because you looked at it. When you act on the market, you move it. In war, the fog hides a real enemy who is already somewhere specific, a real enemy who is you can't see him. So in markets, there's nothing being hidden because the next price is not being seen by anyone yet. We're all writing it together in real time. So Adam, I want to bring you in here. So there is a powerful urge when things are uncertain to wait, to hold off acting until the picture clears and you feel sure. I want you to talk about that urge, because in these systems, it is a trap. So where does it come from and why does it hurt us?
Well, there's a whole lot of, cognitive biases that, affect humans, and in particular humans as it relates, to money and, trading. We got into it, to make money. So we're buying and selling, futures or stocks or FX, in order to make money. And somehow, no matter what the best laid plans that you have in that back test and how simple it looks, to take that next trade based on those predefined rules, it seems like as soon as you get into a position and real money is at stake, everything changes. And all of a sudden trading becomes really, really hard. And it seems almost harder than it should be based on this backtest that you've put together and a plan. And the question is why? Why is it so hard? And in particular, why is trend following as a trading strategy so hard? And there are a few cognitive biases that we can point to. Loss aversion, I think, is a great one. Basically they've done studies, and financial losses hurt twice as much as making money, right? So when you get into a trade and the temptation just basically to take profits and exit and protect one's capital is almost overwhelming. Combined with some other biases like the recency bias. So back to that example I was giving earlier with that oil trade, you've got back test and a plan. You buy a breakout and you put in a stop, and what could be simpler than that to trade that up move in oil and just exit gracefully and let it go. But the recency bias, the news on the TV, the potential for further upside, the anchoring to $200 oil because some expert got on TV and spoke about it. I don't think anyone was pushing a correction back to the 70s. A month or so ago in markets, and all of a sudden something that looked like really, really easy to do on the back test and also in practice becomes really, really hard. And hopefully everybody's able to follow their rules and protect their capital on the way out.
Yeah, good point.
That's friction. Look, you just described friction as if right out of war fighting. So,
look, I want to close this segment with a question for you all. So, we keep saying price is the crowd's answer. So, how much can we trust that answer? Is the price a genuine agreement, a real consensus the whole market is settled on? Or is it just the last thing the crowd happened to shout, a number that can look calm and steady right up until the moment it suddenly breaks and moves violently? So, and then we've got the other side of it from the war camp. In markets, we have this one shared number, the price, that everyone can see and agree on. Does warfare ever get anything like that? Is there ever a shared reference point that both sides recognise and orient around, even partly? Or is the battlefield always missing that single agreed number? So who would like to comment first?
So there isn't a single agreed external number or goal, but there is an internal one that we generally try and share, and that's called the commander's intent. So when the plan is put together, it's a very different experience than you would usually have in a civilian context. There's a huge section in that plan which is the reason why, right? Why is it that we're doing this? And that's and then there's the mission, which is the commander's intent. And what that does is it allows you to, when you don't have a single goal in the market, let's call it, i.e. the target landscape, and when something has gone wrong with the immediate goal, you know what you were actually trying to achieve, which means that you can reorientate yourself and do the thing you need to do. So, if your part of the orders was to take a hill and provide fire support from the hill, well, if you can't take the hill, then you provide fire support from somewhere else. You know why you were being asked to do what you're being asked to do. So it's not a single external measure, i.e. the target, although that often is quite explicitly stated. But I think internally there is that the Germans call it the Schwerpunkt, right? There is that critical focal point, which is the thing that you're aiming for.
Well, I can comment on the price. You said something about price. I think, we use price. We like price. We think we can devise systems and back tests that only use price, and they seem to be successful. So, but price is not reliable, and it changes so dramatically. And buying all-time highs or watching your position go home on Friday and all your good trades close at the all-time high means nothing for Monday. It could be limit down on Monday. And so we use price. I think Americans and the world are getting a kind of a good lesson on price with these prediction markets and things that are of a 90% chance of happening. They don't happen. And so we like price, we use price, but I'm not a huge fan of price because it doesn't always do what I want it to do.
Yeah. So really, I guess when I parse down what we were talking about, it kind of, I compartmentalize that in two areas, kind of picking up onto Ben, objective numbers, objective values. This is how Boyd first got into talking to the Marine Corps, was that after Vietnam, the Marine Corps was in a deep soul search to figure out how did we lose? We had all the numbers, we had all the sensors, we had all the technology, we had all the capital, we had all the weaponry. We for every one we lost, we killed, 1,000 of them. I think, I don't know the exact ratio, but, 2 million dead versus 58,000 dead. And we still lost to people with inferior technology and inferior weaponry. And it always came down to with Boyd, we lost the moral cognitive war. We lost it in the mind, much less the physical. And I think that kind of ties into what Jerry's saying, is that price is, can mean different things, or, people can be indifferent, or, they're very subjective. But there is a moral cognitive sense of it versus just something that's purely physical. It's not necessarily a mechanistic statistics gathering thing that says that, the spreadsheet says this should happen every time, that there's other complex dynamics, because like warfare, markets are a human enterprise. Markets are a human endeavor of people acting, rationally or irrationally, whatever we want to say, but they're still there doing it, and it as humans, and that is not necessarily the things that we can measure and create metrics around aren't necessarily useful, because again, on a purely metric standpoint, the United States should have won the Vietnam War overwhelmingly, but they didn't. And the reason was because there was disconnect to the understanding of the moral, the philosophical, the cognitive aspects of war versus the technical aspects. And it's the same thing with trading in markets. It's the same exact. I think that's probably one of the best carryovers between the two. One of the sources that Boyd used in Patterns of Conflict in later versions was F.A. Hayek, and F.A. Hayek, the economist, and Adam mentioned biases. Yeah, I am slightly biased. I've written 2 academic papers on Austrian economics and Boyd's orientation. But value is subjective, and a price not necessarily make any sense to me. It doesn't per se have to, because it's not necessarily the result of something that was mechanical or predictable. It's the result of humans coming to exchange and trade, again, which may or may not be rational. And I think Hayek was saying something along
it's an argument of human beings, Mark. It's an argument of human beings.
Yeah.
It's an argument over what constitutes value. Yeah.
Just like war fighting, just like war. At the end of the day, that's what war is. Hey, he's here.
Here we go. We've got Mike joining us. So, Mike, you've missed out on the beginning, unfortunately, but I'll bring you in where I can. So, Mike, we're up to the second segment called The Fog, and we're just closing up The Fog. So I'm just going to give a recap of this section, and then we're going to move on to the next segment and hopefully bring you in. But great to see you, Mike. And I heard the traffic was pretty appalling with the Pride March and everything going on in New York at the moment. But it's good to see you. It is agreed from both camps that you cannot fast forward the future. So you stop trying to see it and instead build something to respond to whatever comes. So where we might have differences of opinion, however, for the war camp, your fog hides something real and findable, an enemy who is always out there somewhere. Ours from the trend followers camp hides nothing because the next move has not been written by anyone yet. So this leads us straight into the next question and the next segment. If you genuinely cannot predict the future, then what on earth are you doing instead? And that is the loop. So segment 3 is the loop. This next idea is the one most people think they already understand, but most have it wrong. So you may have heard of the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act. It usually gets drawn as 4 boxes in a circle, with the lesson being, there you go, thanks Moose, the lesson being go round the loop faster than the other guy and you win. Now, forget that picture, as Moose is going to tell you, because it misses the real point. The real point is stranger and more useful. When someone is genuinely skilled, most of what they do never passes through a conscious decision at all. They do not stop, weigh options and choose. The trained hand just moves and the thinking is already baked into how they see the situation. So that's what we're going to dig into. So before I bring it to Moose, Jerry, can you take us back to the day when cocoa exploded upward? I do not want to what you are thinking. I want to know what you physically did during that process. So when the market moved, what did your hand actually do, and how much of it was deliberate in the moment versus already trained into you?
Well, and I may be the Lord of trend following, but you're the professor of trend following. So I think some of these questions I feel like I'm going to get graded on. So I'm a little nervous. A little nervous. Like, I got to get this question right. But
I'm just going to get my grading sheet.
Honestly, I can only say what I did. I didn't do anything. I think in this day and age, just like in a little bit of warfare, there's a lot of computers and a lot of technology that kind of takes over. And so we built a system. We built trading systems. We built infrastructure to execute those trades when nobody's watching. No one has to watch. They're going to happen. Nobody's emotions or cognitive biases are going to have any impact at all. Zero. And sometimes I'm making lots of money and I feel great. Sometimes I don't feel good. And sometimes when I lose a lot of money, I feel good or I feel bad. But none of it is going to have an impact on any trade, least of all cocoa. It was an innocuous trade. It was a zero trade. It meant nothing. The big characteristics of cocoa that everybody knows is it hadn't made money in 15 years, hadn't had a big trend in forever. So it was just another loss. It's just another loss. We take them all the time. Try not to dwell on it or even think about it. And so it was just a byproduct of following our mechanical processes. And how many trades did we do that day? We traded 400 markets. We may have done 5 or 10 or 20 trades that day. And I didn't think of any of them. And one of them worked out really well on that particular day. So that's the beauty of what we do is, and the curse, we have to just sit back and watch and hands off.
Moose, you first and then Ben to follow up. So this is what Boyd was really driving at, wasn't it? So not 4 boxes and a stopwatch. The idea that the way you have trained yourself to see the world does the work for you before you ever consciously decide anything. So can you both unpack that for us?
This is how Ben and I first met. I don't know, Ben, was it like 6 or 7 years ago when we started talking about this, and when what Boyd was authentically saying was not this, a circular observe, orient, decide, act loop. In competitive situations, that's what you want your competitors to do. What Boyd was saying is that as humans, we're complex adaptive systems interacting with complex adaptive systems around us, be it a market, be it a Marine Corps, be it war, be it an enemy force. And each individual has an orientation. And my orientation is what makes me me. It's my cultural traditions, my genetic heritage, new information that I come across, my previous experiences and training and psychological state and biases and emotions. And most importantly, my ability to analyze, but also to synthesize. So in other words, my ability to destroy things, mental models and perceptions, and my ability to recreate perceptions to keep them matched to reality as time unfolds, which, Jerry gave a pretty good example of how he does it. What the orientation is in turn fractal. And this is one of my earliest conversations I ever remember having with Ben years ago, that orientation is fractal, meaning that I have one. The 6 of us have a collective one in order to form a podcast. The trend following community, there's a general orientation that would distinguish a trend follower from another type of investor, another type of trader. But, because for example, Ben and I are both Marines. I'm a Marine, Ben's a Marine. I have an orientation as a Marine, Ben has one. We collectively have one together as Marines, again, because it's fractal up and down all the way to the individual human. Everybody's orientation is unique to them. Where our orientations intersect, we're able to do things like have a podcast, have a Marine Corps, etc. What's important about that is that our orientation, which Adam was talking about biases earlier, the orientation houses our biases, and our orientation in turn directly shapes how we see things, and it shapes how we make our decisions. It shapes how we act within reality and how we learn within it, and then how we continue to learn and update and reorient, or not. In other words, if I'm static and I don't change my orientation, I'm going to have a bad mismatch with reality, because reality is not static, and capital markets are not static, and warfighting is not static. Those are dynamic human enterprises that are constantly moving, constantly changing on a ball that's spinning around the sun and falling through space, yada, yada. That if I don't rewrite that cognitive software that I have, in other words, my orientation, my operating system, I'm going to be in a lot of trouble, because that orientation, if I keep it dynamic or static, it doesn't matter. Either way, it's shaping how I interact with reality and how I function and learn within reality. So I have to be really cognizant of that. And ultimately, that's what John Boyd was trying to teach us. He was trying to teach us that orientation and the process of OODA, which has been bastardized and reduced into a circular model, what he's actually trying to show us is how we learn in order to adapt to improve our capacity for free and independent action. It's no different from a Marine as it would be a trend following trader. If I don't understand how to deductively break down models and then inductively synthesize new models and keep my software updated to reality, I'm going to fail every single time. I'm not going to be able to adapt and survive on my own terms.
Yeah, so I can maybe bring an example that kind of illustrates this. So first time I ever first time I bought a motorbike, as many people are, I was quite obsessed with getting my knee down on the track. And I went and read a book about bike dynamics, because I'm a massive nerd, which really helped me kind of picture how this thing was working underneath me. So that was the knowledge. And then there was the first time that I took my bike on track, and I was able to kind of get my knee down between corners consistently. And the feeling at that point is there was no bike. There was me, and there was the actions that I wanted the bike to take. And because I'd done that reading, I understood why when I microscopically rolled off the throttle, it's shortening the wheelbase, and I can feel the pressure on my knee increasing, because it's tipping me into the corner more, right? But actually, the experience of driving the bike around that corner, I wasn't conscious of the throttle at all, right? So that's two nested loops. There's the intuition loop, which Boyd calls implicit guidance and control, which is what allows you, when you're skilled at something or experienced at something, to skip over a decision which takes too long, straight to action. So your actions unfold as a natural consequence of your skill in an environment. And then there's the other implicit guidance and control, which flows from orientation to observation, which shapes what you pay attention to. So when you're experienced, I used to do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, rolling with a black belt as a white belt, like that person is just able to ingest a whole heap more information through his senses and all of his appendages, that I just was completely overwhelmed. So I think the takeaway here is that there's essentially, it's not one loop, it's three. And the loop is the thing that you sit inside. There's the fast loop, which is where you're skilled with something, events are unfolding as you expect, and you're operating in flow, where you know what you expect to happen happens, and you're just tripping along, and like this, I know this, I've got this down. Then there's the slower loop, which is like, okay, I understand the situation that I'm in, but I need to think about it a bit first. There's a bit more information I need to bring in. I can't just take a fluent action next step. I need to stop and maybe, discuss it. And then there's the even more slow loop, which is actually my orientation is completely wrong. I've done something. I've observed the effects of that action, and it's completely not what I expected. And now I need to decide, did I get it wrong? Do I need to basically destroy and recreate my mental models and go again? Or do I need to say, actually, no, I didn't get it wrong, but I need to take another action now to bring my expectation into line with what I expected to happen? And it's more of an adjustment. So it's sort of three nested loops, and I think Boyd, had he been alive for longer, I believe he would have been playing in the active inference space, which is a computational neuroscience.
I think what Ben is showing, it's not a flat 2D circular loop the way it's taught by Big Box Consulting and others, that it's actually multidimensional. And when you think of orientation, I always use the example of a fountainhead. When water's pushing out of a fountain, like if orientation is my, paraphrase Ayn Rand, I guess it's the fountainhead, right, of my cognition or my belief, my desire, but that goes in multi directions. And when you look at John Boyd's OODA loop sketch, the arrows, there's more than 4 arrows. They're going in multi directions. A friend of mine recently described it as a torrid. It's like the torrid going in and around, and it's that you're able to see that it's in fact not flat, that the interconnectedness and complexity of what's actually going on in your environment, what's going on cognitively, what's going on, as Boyd or Sun Tzu would say, morally, mentally, physically, that there's a symbiotic flow relationship between all of that, where, Ben brought up racing from his own personal experience. The one I use a lot is Ayrton Senna. If you've studied Ayrton Senna, the Formula One driver, and you read about his career and how he would describe basically becoming one with the vehicle, right? Becoming one in a complex adaptive system inside of the vehicle, where the vehicle was actually an extension of him as a complex adaptive system, which was involved in a race, which is a complex adaptive system, which is subject to weather and Earth's rotation. So, Ben's talking about 3 layers. It ends up being there's a lot more that you have to account for than merely a flat circular this. And this is why I always say, and you've heard me say it on the podcast a million times, you want your competitors to operate this way. You want traders to operate this way. You want others to operate that way, because for sure they're not operating like this, which if you really drew this it would be a multi-dimensional thing. It would not be a flat linear left to right. It's going like that, like a torrid or like a fountainhead. This is why it's so important to understand OODA, not in the flat 2D sense, because it's easily defeatable. It's basically trading. It's basically creating a mindset and a frame of thinking to look at things as if they were complicated. So you're looking at complex adaptive systems like markets, trading, warfighting. You're looking at those as if they were complicated, like a jet engine. A jet engine is complicated. If it doesn't work, I have any number of flow charts or things to figure out how it's not working or how I can fix it. But markets don't work like that, and hurricanes don't work like that, and Formula One races don't work like that, because those are all interconnected inside of complexity, which is completely different. And that's what Boyd is pointing to, and that's why OODA loop sketch is what Boyd drew.
It's naive, isn't it? It's a naive simplification. Yeah.
Yes, it's catastrophic, and when you operate that way, it's fatal.
All right, Adam, over to you. So we're talking about the trained hand that acts on price without stopping to forecast, basically. So I want you to explain where that skill actually comes from, because people assume it's intuition you're born with, yet it's not. So how is it built for the trend follower?
So I think for the trend follower, the goal is to make the trading and the execution automatic. And so that can come from, automation in the sense that Jerry describes. So you could have a trading team responsible for execution and not necessarily determining strategy. You could systematize it with computers, like I think, Ben, you've done that. And you could basically program the computer and then take all of the emotion or repetition out of it. Or you could basically train yourself via repetition and experience into executing without deviating from the system. And I think the goal is to basically get into a state where you're able to think fast, but not revert or degrade to being impacted by biases, so that you're just able to think fast and execute your plan and your system quickly and efficiently, and then probably get onto some other more productive use of your time.
Okay, so here's the line we trend followers want to state loud and clear because it ties the whole thing together. So when we follow a trend, that's exactly what's happening. We're not forecasting where price is going to go. We're reacting to where it actually is with a trained response we've built over years. So I like to think of it as trailing price like a shadow. A shadow always follows the body, always a step behind, never out in front guessing. So that's pretty well what trend following is. The price moves and we move with it, lagging slightly, never trying to predict its next step. So there is no forecast anywhere in that process. So we're simply staying matched to what is already happening. So here's the knot I want us all to untie, because on the face of it, it sounds like a contradiction. So science tells us the brain is basically a prediction machine. So all of us, all the time, are running quiet predictions and adjusting when reality does not match. So if we're all wired to predict, how can I stand here and say a trend follower should never forecast? So the answer, I believe, as a trend follower, is that there are two completely different things hiding inside that one word, predict. So one is forecasting where the market's going to go next, calling the future, taking a guess on direction. The other is simply staying matched to where the market already is right now and moving with it. So a trend follower does this second one constantly and flatly refuses to do the first. So we do not call the future, we track the present. So, gentlemen, what are your thoughts on this? And Mike, now that you've sort of moved in, I'll start with you first. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think off the tip of my tongue, I think two-pronged in that I want to be able to brainstorm about and talk about, what could happen, even if they're crazy pie-in-the-sky ideas. They're very low probability or things like that. But I have fun kind of imagining wild things. I think that could help in the sense of sticking to your system when things happen, because I've already kind of rehearsed wacky things like this happening. So yeah, I have no problem executing my trades as they come. Yeah, and then on the other side, it's I trust fully in. The only prediction that I think a trend follower makes is that trends will continue to occur somehow in some direction and some area. We don't really know that stuff. We don't get too picky on the directions and when and the timing and the degree and the markets, all that stuff. But they're going to occur enough to where we'll be able to make some money. So, and then having the trust that that's going to happen, and having the trust in my system that's going to be able to capitalize on it and capture and be there and make some money. So like on one hand, it's like, you got to be able to stick to it. And it can kind of like keep you fresh in rehearsing, what do you think about this crude? Is it gonna, what do you think about the Strait of Hormuz now? What do you think could happen there? I don't know, but I can imagine that happening, and I can imagine, getting short, and everyone thinking that oil is going to go to the moon, and everyone's talking about this commodity super cycle and this that. But I can imagine like taking the complete opposite positions for maybe a couple of years. Who knows? I don't know. But I can imagine that. So I think that could like keep you sharp, the tool sharp. So if and when things do occur, that if you get too bogged down in one sort of narrative or one sort of story happening, you're not like this, like, oh man, yeah, I don't know, that like you're getting separated from your system there, and you're not really reacting to what's happening now, which is all that matters, at least for trend followers. Yeah.
Before I get onto the soldiers side, Jerry, Adam, anything to add here?
I can extend what Mike said, and if you take the probability of winning or losing, and let's just say it's a coin flip, so 50-50, or, it might even be 40-60, depending on, what type of system you trade. If you adopt probabilistic thinking, it's almost likely that the trade you take is not going to work out. Whereas I think the human mind likes to think that the trade they take is going to be a winner, and then extrapolates out some consequence or event from that position. So, you buy oil, and then you dial into that trade working out for you. You get on board basically with your trades, and you fast forward into the future, and you think about how that trade is going to pay off for you. But in reality, they're like 50-50 probabilities. So it's probably more healthy just to, as Mike said, apply probabilistic thinking, and maybe think about, well, how would this trade not work out? How would this trade work out, depending on, what kind of person you are. Are you a glass half full or a glass half empty kind of person? And you then apply whatever you need to do to maybe balance yourself, so that you don't get carried away with whatever is the positioning of your system at the moment. Understanding that it doesn't predict the future. It'll just participate in it and hopefully make money if the profits of the trends exceeds the losses on the non-trending trades.
JP, your thoughts?
Okay, I think you mentioned something about prediction, and I had a story about predictions. If you remember, Rich, but a bunch of years ago in our spaces, we would just casually tell the listeners and participants that we didn't predict. Trend following doesn't predict, and they would get really mad at us, and they say, "You do predict." And some of them kind of might have been even trend followers, but so we couldn't get them to stop saying that. And I said, well, if we predict, we're only right on about 40% of the trades, or 35% of the trades. So we're not really good at predicting, if you want to call us predicting. And could you imagine the opposite? If we touted, if we got up on a soapbox and said, yeah, we do predict. Look at that cocoa trade. Obviously, I predicted that. The response would be, you didn't predict that. You're buying all these breakouts. You have no idea which one's going to work. You just sit back and let it run until your trading exit gets hit. So, I think we don't predict.
Win, can you?
You can't win. No.
All right, gents. So over to the war camp. The soldiers. Ben, Moose, thoughts?
Yeah, I'll maybe go first.
No soldiers here.
Sorry, Marines. Sorry.
Yeah, I think Mike just gave the best description of building an orientation, right? And it is predictive, but it's not prescriptive, right? You are constantly predicting what might happen without getting fixed on that you think this will happen, right? You're constantly unfolding your imagination, which is built on your experience. You're imagining what might unfold in the future, and you're imagining that several steps ahead, so that you start to build this kind of, the Germans call it, a lot of Freudian stuff comes from the mission commands literature from the Germans, World War II and before, and they called it Fingerspitzengefühl, right? The fingertip feel. And the only way you can do that is by either doing it, like the example of the bike, or imagining it, right? And I think Mike's description of, constantly thinking about, what about this, what about that, keeps your pattern recognition infrastructure active, so that when the thing does start to happen, you have pre-imagined it and you have that pattern recognition. And that's where I think, this is where I believe Boyd would have gone had he remained with us for a little bit longer. He would have been into the active inference, the brain as a prediction machine, and Buddha is this kind of predictive machine, but it's not predicting what you think will happen. It's predicting many things that could happen.
Yeah, I think Boyd would add a few other things too, distinguish between brain and mind. The brain is a physical organ where mind is the software inside of the brain, or that flows through it with, another way of saying orientation. Boyd was very famous of saying a line that machines don't fight wars, people do, and they use their minds. It's a very great book by Grant Hammond called The Mind of War about John Boyd. Terrain doesn't fight wars either. Markets don't fight wars. It's the trader. It's the Marine. It's the individual warfighter. I think another word, maybe in lieu of prediction, I might say anticipatory, because if my orientation is fluid and I'm continuously staying on a cycle of destruction and creation, of analysis and synthesis, as Boyd would have said, and that we could do a whole episode just on analysis and synthesis and why every trend follower should not only read, but they should understand Boyd's destruction and creation, is because they become anticipatory. They understand that I have to destroy my model of the world, because the world is not static. It's constantly moving. It's constantly in a state of flux. And if I box myself into static models that don't change, that don't have flexibility, that don't have certain tolerances and things, that I'm not learning, and if I'm not learning, then I'm not adaptable. So I think that that's really important. And I think when we say, trend following, just like Marine, those are orientation systems, building off of what Ben was just saying. These are orientations. These are cognitive understandings of reality and complexity that enable us to look at the same set of facts that somebody else looks at and comes up with a completely different conclusion. A trend follower might look at something one way and see something, and a trader from a different type of discipline, or a Ben Graham person, or a growth at a reasonable price, or whoever, low PE ratio, whatever, they're going to look at the same set of facts and come up with a completely different conclusion. And all that comes down from is the fact that our orientation implicitly guides and controls or shapes how we make sense of our own reality, and then how we act in that reality, and how we learn and operate in that reality as time goes forward.
I think the word that I heard that stood out was facts. Some of those facts won't turn out to be facts. They're your facts, they're my facts. We want them to be facts.
Yeah.
But they're faulty understanding of reality. It's foggy reality.
Yeah.
So we all face that.
That's why destruction and creation is so important, because when Boyd wrote that, he was fusing together entropy, uncertainty, and incompleteness, and we're never going to be able to, as Jerry's just kind of alluding to, you're never going to know precisely because of the nature of uncertainty per Heisenberg, the nature of incompleteness per Gödel, and the nature of entropy per the second law of thermodynamics. Boyd, one of Boyd's acolytes that collaborate a lot with, had a quote that Boyd used to say this all the time: "Math is imprecise." Math, you can't prove math with math. You can't prove calculus with calculus. No system can determine its own character and nature within itself. And the more that you try to do that, the more that you increase the confusion and disorder.
This is self-referential problems, the paradox. Yeah. So I'll close off with this segment. So where I think, from my perspective, where we agree, the skilled expert acts before he consciously decides. And the real skill lives in how you have trained yourself to see, not in a checklist of steps or the diagram that Mark put up. So where we have different opinions, for instance, you still have to guess the enemy in order to act well, because nothing shows you where he is. So you always need to guess or predict where that enemy is going to be. But fortunately, in our trend following world, we never have to guess, because the price shows us where it is. The guessing's simply taken out of our loop. So if you're not predicting, then the real question becomes about timing. So when do you move and when do you do nothing at all? So that's the next segment we're going to get into, which is the final segment of this episode, tempo. So there is a popular and a wrong reading of Boyd that shrinks everything he said down to one word: speed. So the cartoon version goes like this: whoever acts fastest wins. So just be quicker than the other guy. That's the bumper sticker Boyd, and it misses the point badly. So we're going to take that apart. So tempo is not raw speed. It is rhythm, the right place for the situation. Fast when fast serves you, but slow or completely still when that serves you. So this is the part people find hardest to believe. Sometimes the strongest move is to do absolutely nothing at all. So Mike, I want to bring you in here. So give us a real example of this. Tell us about a stretch where you made money by sitting still while everyone around you was busy trading. What doing nothing actually looked like, and why did it pay you?
Oh God, Tony, that bond short must have been 3 years, early 21 through mid 24, I believe, or maybe early 24. And it was people continue to ask me. Sometimes most of the time, my investors are not very chatty. They don't really chat me up about what I think, because they're going to get the same answer. I don't know. I don't know. I don't really care. So, but I remember with that bond short, it was just 3 years of rolling these futures quarter to quarter. It was just, yeah, we're not doing anything. Still short, fellas. Gotta go. Talk to you later. And I feel like, I don't know if that was a period where people were, they can't go this high. They can't go this high. They got to go back down. They got to go back down, right? Because people were just so used to such a long period of time where rates were low. And back to, just what we were just saying in the segment right before this, facts and beliefs and, false beliefs. It's like, oh, well, if something happens lately and you get used to it, that's just how it is now. No, that's how it's been lately, not now, not going forward, because what that means now is, well, that's how it's going to be forever. No. So, yeah, that was a period that was very easy to make money, from that trade, at least. And COVID as well, the commodity rally, as well, was wild. And we mentioned cocoa, but I imagine that one also, because that was pretty long trade, at least a little over a couple years for me, at least. But I imagine it attracted a lot of people who, eyes widened and they just wanted to get in on the action, because it was just such an insane run, where the chart looked crazy and things like that. And I imagine it attracted people who had maybe it was their first ever trade in cocoa before, just kind of brought people into that market for the first time. So
some of the managed futures CTAs were bragging about selling cocoa at all-time highs in 24, and a few times in 24, December, January 2025, middle of April 24. So we were sitting there with nothing to do, but there was activity on some of them, getting out of those, reducing that position down. Didn't work too well then, but it kind of worked well in silver this year.
Yeah, you don't hear from them a lot of times, but you hear from them when they want to pound their chest and show off that they've been doing good. Great.
So Moose, I want to bring you in here. So this is exactly where the speed kills reading of Boyd falls apart, isn't it? So explain what Boyd actually meant by tempo, because it was never simply about being the fastest.
Oh man, yeah. Of late, I've had a lot of discussions on this. This is actually one of the areas where I think Boyd gets completely misunderstood. I also think that it's a area when people reduce Boyd to purely speed, they've their scholarship comes into question because they've missed the corpus of literally all of his work. Like his major points. It's like you went to Boyd's school, but you were absent the day that they taught Boyd. But tempo to your point about rhythm, a lot of different directions we could go here, but essentially speed means nothing if direction is off. If you're misoriented or disoriented directionally, it doesn't matter how fast you're going. You're just going really fast in the wrong direction. And I'm sure the traders could tell us plenty of trading plans that fell apart because of a bad orientation, a misalignment with reality, and people went really fast and they were really efficient, but they were just really fast and efficient in the wrong direction. An example that I use a lot is Blockbuster. Blockbuster was really fast and efficient, just in the wrong direction. Not unlike Kodak was also fast and efficient, just in the wrong direction. Tempo with rhythm and varying speeds integrates well with Boyd. He talks a lot about this in his seminal briefing, Patterns of Conflict. It's not speed for speed's sake. It's speed combined with other things. So the acronym that he uses, or the abbreviations that he uses, VHRI: variety, harmony, rapidity, initiative. Right? These things are not mutually exclusive. They're using time. Not necessarily as speed. They're using it in conjunction with things that are directional, that are designed to offset the enemy. One of the other terms that he used was called fast transients, right? And this is another thing where speed really gets destroyed with Boyd. But basically, fast transients, all that means was that I was throwing a variety of things at you so rapidly, harmonious to my own mission and initiative, that you're overwhelmed and overloaded that you didn't know what to do because you were getting hit so fast and you just stood there and didn't know what was happening to you, right? That's a question of tempo, not speed for speed's sake.
Adam, I want to bring you in here. So there's a real psychological pull to trade just to feel like you're doing something. So to be active because sitting on your hands feels like failing. So talk about that pull, and because that's exactly where tempo is won or lost in practice.
So I'm trying to work out, like, why is that the case? And I'm thinking that it goes back to sort of participating in an activity that sort of is kind of out of control. Markets are out of control. Think of it like a tiger, and the trend follower is attempting to ride a tiger. It's obviously a very stressful and wild experience. And I think we're just hardwired to revert to a fight or flight response when we come under stress. And so the fight manifests itself in overtrading. So I want to take back control because I'm scared. I'm going to fight. And so how do you fight in trading? You would just trade more, reduce a losing position to try to stop the pain, or take a breakout early. So they're your type 1 and type 2 errors in trading. And all you're doing is just basically mucking up your back test, which has been constructed when you're not in that state. And then I guess the opposite of that is the flight response, and you freeze up. And it's not the good freezing up. It's not the Mike Melissinos, let's just stay short the bond and get the profits type freezing up. It's like, I can't do anything. Like, I can't get out of bed. I can't open the computer. I can't deal with these markets, which could be just as bad as the fight response. So I think it's finding that that balance in there where you can control your cortisol levels and your stress. And personally, I think that all comes back to position sizing. I think that's kind of the most important variable in that regard. So you can have a really good system, and it can be profitable, So you can have a good profit factor on it, but you could still lose money by over leveraging your good trading system, which is obviously a really devastating outcome to have a good algorithm and a profitable algorithm, but to get the position size out of whack. So that sort of feeds back into this sort of concept of risk of ruin and the chance of going broke in the ordinary course of your business. So I would think that at the core of it is reducing the position size to a level that's manageable and commensurate with your resources. So not trying to make 80% return a year in trend following or something insane like that. Dialing it back to something that's reasonable, and then once you're playing within that reasonable sort of range of outcomes, I think you're reducing the risk of that fight or flight taking over and mucking up what was a good plan to start with.
So, to close out this section, which is the end of this episode, this is a question for all of you to discuss. So, in war, you win on tempo by throwing off a specific enemy's timing, by disrupting his rhythm. But in markets, there's no single enemy whose timing I can break. So whose rhythm am I actually fitting myself to? Is it the market's own natural rhythm, the long, calm stretches and then the sudden, violent breaks? Or is there no one on the other side at all and I'm just dancing alone? So going to start with the war camp first. Gentlemen, your thoughts?
Yeah. So listening to all you guys talking there, I was reminded that Boyd's early career was actually it was more about aerodynamics than thermodynamics. He came up with a theory called energy maneuverability theory, and really tempo and managing your own energy is really, I believe, what the kind of core of it is. And in a combat situation, what you're trying to do is you're trying to turn an enemy into himself by closing off his access to information and action, which is what Boyd calls the cognitive spiral. And a closed system obviously has to collapse into entropy. So I think your tempo in trading is almost like a kind of frequency matching thing, right? You don't want to be wasting energy by spinning your wheels, which is the equivalent of getting inside your own OODA loop, where you're trying to do stuff when you don't really have the information for it. But equally, you want to remain in the market. Like doing nothing is not, well, doing nothing if it's consciously doing nothing is an option, but doing nothing, taking no action is not an option, because that's the whole point of being in the market, right? Is to deploy capital. So yeah, I think energy is just as important as tempo.
Yeah, I mean, that's what Boyd was saying, that our tempo has to be our tempo and our battle rhythm. It has to be faster than our adversaries. Originally, what he would say in patterns of conflict, that's to get inside the OODA loop of the opponent, meaning that in compressing my time scale through a better orientation, where I can sense faster and act faster with superior implicit guidance and control, because my orientation is more aligned, I'm going to have a faster tempo and rhythm than my adversary, who in turn, their time cycle is going to get elongated, because I'm going to be operating inside their time scale. Their time scale is going to continue to elongate because they're getting hit with mismatches and friction and fast transients that they're not going to be able to overcome, where confusion and disorder are going to overload them, and they're going to be rendered irrelevant. Well, for the trader, it just basically means just me as one versus me, operating within a market versus a battlefield opponent. But I have to understand that ability to cycle through and destroy and create models in line or faster than the rate of change, or else I'm going to be rendered irrelevant. And to Ben's point about energy maneuverability theory, that might mean that sometimes I go fast, sometimes I go slow, sometimes I do nothing. That's the nature of tempo across a time scale versus raw speed, which is an absolute disaster when you're teaching Boyd in a linear speed model, which I run into a fair bit.
Adam, Mike, trend followers perspective, what do you guys think?
I think that the market sets the tempo, I guess. I think I'm using the right word there. So, and the way we can manage it or overcome it or succeed is to basically have the trend following philosophy of wide stops and not getting caught up in the noise. So it's that signal noise ratio. And this is why I don't like trading short-term time frames, because there's just too much noise. And then when you widen the charts out to obviously daily, but then even like weekly or monthly bars, you're getting the real signal instead of the noise of the 15-minute bars or the tick data, or however some people trade. And so the goal here is to basically do this dance with the market, but it changes regimes. So it can be in a bullish, calm state, then it can morph into a bearish and volatile state, and it can just move between these states, and you don't really know what you're going to get every day you wake up, or every quarter, or every month, or whatever. So I think that's the dance we do, and that's what makes it hard. So I'd say make it easy on yourself and widen the time frames.
Well, I think when you take if you have a rules-based approach, your work, the daily work, doesn't change much, I don't believe. So you're still in that. Okay, I'm still doing the same thing. I'm inputting the new data, and now I'm going to run that through the processing plant of all my rules, and it'll tell me whether or not to do anything. Now you can obviously, increase the sensitivity of that, or desensitize it, where increase the sensitivity and make more trades because it's responding to more movement more frequently. Where Adam was saying you're trading more often, you're getting in and out a little bit more, you're okay. Then you can, widen that a bit and see, all right, well, we're still going to do the same work, but it's going to give us less trades to do, because it's going to respond, not respond as quickly as a shorter term system would. Okay. So, with that though, you're one, for me, I'm like, I want to see what works. Does the shorter term where it responds more frequently, does that work as well? I'll come up with some, scoring metrics so I can compare systems over time and say, all right, well, this one's works better, at least historically. If I do it and everything. So, I know, for and that'll help me kind of figure out what would work better. One works better, and one works better that I can do. That both are very important. You can have a theoretical system that does well, that Rich might trade well, but Mike, it might be a disaster. And so you really need to, I think, come to grips on how much work you want to do, and when you get your ass kicked, are you going to be able to keep doing it like this way without, let's go back to the control panel and start fiddling with the knobs. And, I don't know, maybe we should be shorter term. What do you think? Yeah, because, Trump's in office and he talks so often and he swings it around. Yeah, maybe we should just dial it. And no, you're fucked. You're fucked then, because you're always behind. You don't know. You think you come to these beliefs really fast when there's something you don't like that's happening. And you can't do that. You're in real trouble then, because there's the markets. There's always be something you don't like. If the Marxists, they're not really a joyride. So, when you can be honest with what it is you're looking to capture. I'm fine with giving a lot, giving more back than maybe someone else at the end of a big move, because I'm not going to get whipped in the consolidation periods maybe as much. I'm cool with that trade. Some people no, they don't, and they like the other way better. Okay, great. But at least from a systematic trend following point of view, the daily work doesn't change much at all. You might have some more trades than someone else, and then to the point also too of I trade less markets, I trade more. Jerry's trading hundreds. Okay, well, some people may not want to practically be able to execute that well because they're
we can say bad things about Jerry now, Mike, because he's left.
Oh yeah, no, but that's just different ways. We know other trend following firms. I think Mulvaney and Balmore, they don't trade as many markets as say I do or Jerry does or something like that. Okay. I don't know. Maybe that's going to work better. Maybe not. But we all have to make those decisions, and then okay, we're going with that. We're not going to have a back to the drawing board every couple of years or something, or when something happens we don't like, and then you're on a roller coaster of an internal roller coaster that's just not going to sync up well. It's not going to produce optimal performance over the long run, I don't think. All
right, gents. So I'm going to recap. So where I think we agree, rhythm beats raw speed, and knowing when to do nothing is a genuine skill, not a gap in your game. Where we might have not disagreements, but might not see eye to eye exactly. Your tempo is aimed at a person designed to wrong foot a thinking opponent. That's probably more from the war side. A trend followers, however, is fitted to a system that has nobody on the other side of it to fool. That's how I think that leaves that episode of tempo. So that comes to the end of our first episode, gentlemen. Before we break, let me draw episode 1 together. So we started with friction, the way every plan breaks the moment it meets the real world. Then we turned to the fog, the fact that the full picture never assembles. So you build to respond rather than to predict. Then we went to the loop, where the skilled hand acts before it decides. And just now we've had the tempo section where rhythm beats raw speed and stillness is a real skill. So we have had 4 ideas so far. In our next episode, we go into the further 4 ideas. So underneath all of these ideas is one difference between our 2 worlds. So here's the one line to carry into part 2 next month. In war, the Marine has to guess where the enemy is going to be. The trend follower, however, never guesses where the market is going because the price already is the crowd's answer and he simply follows it. So hold on to that, because part 2 is all about what you actually do with it, how you act, when you commit, when you pull back, and how you survive long enough to win. So until next month, gentlemen, Marines, back to the trenches, traders, back to the screens, and see you all for episode 2, where we're going to conclude the special. Thanks everyone for coming.
Thanks for tuning into Turtle Talk. If you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to rate and review the podcast. It really helps us reach more listeners. Share it with your friends and invite them to join the conversation. Got a question for us? Send it to info@aussieturtles.com, and we'll do our best to feature it on a future episode. Please note, Turtle Talk is for informational and educational purposes only. The views expressed by the hosts and guests are their own, and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the podcast producers or affiliates. This podcast does not provide financial, investment, or professional advice. Always consult with a qualified professional before making investment decisions. That's it for today, folks. See you next time, and as always, may the trend be with you.